And isn't it just hilarious that this theist opens his video by alleging that he's going to, quote-unquote, destroy atheism?
I'll be completely destroying atheism in this video.
And meanwhile, the best he has to offer is an invitation for atheists to disprove his position. Are you kidding me?
Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never miscommunication. You can't explain that.
Evolution is a religion.
If there is just one chance in a million that this is true, it's worth believing.
Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. Please consider becoming a patron today. Simply click the link in the description below. Thank you. Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and you're all very welcome to another episode of When Theists Fail. I thought we'd have a little bit of fun today and focus on a TikTok theist, a theist who alleges that he's going to, quote-unquote, destroy atheism. We'll just see about that, So let's not delay any further and dive right in. I hope you enjoy it.
I'll be completely destroying atheism in this video. So I used to be an atheist, but whenever I tried to disprove Christianity, I became a Christian. A lot of people don't know what changed my mind. Well, this is part of it. Not enough time in this video to go all the way from atheism to Christianity, but I will completely destroy atheism. Okay, so there's three things: atheism, agnosticism, and theism. Theism, you say that there is a God. Agnosticism, you say you don't know if there's a God or not. Or atheism, you say that there is no God. You literally cannot be an atheist. How can you say that there is no God? How can you use the natural to disprove the supernatural? You literally can't.
And unsurprisingly, right off the bat, we get an assertion. Tell me, why can't I use the natural to disprove the supernatural? In some cases, it's trivially easy to see how such a feat could be accomplished. It just depends on the nature of the claim. For example, discovering Jesus' body would undoubtedly debunk claims of physical resurrection. Even Dr. William Lane Craig, one of the most accomplished and foremost Christian apologists in the world, agrees with me on this point. But don't take my word for it. Check out the following Biola University Q&A, which clarifies Craig's thinking on the matter. Tom writes, quote, "Would you agree that if the body of Christ were to be found, that this would give good reason to think Christianity is false? Assuming, of course, that we could know that the body was in fact Christ's body. This seems to be a reasonable proposition in my view." To which Craig responds, quote, "The discovery of Jesus' remains would, of course, give good reason to think Christianity to be false. Paul told the Corinthians, if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. 1 Corinthians 15:14. Jesus' resurrection is essential to Christianity." In other words, dear listener, the discovery of Jesus' body would offer strong evidence against the proposition that Jesus physically raised from the dead. Now, I'm not suggesting that just because William Lane Craig said something, that therefore this TikTok theist is duty-bound to accept it, but Craig's acknowledgement that the natural could potentially debunk the supernatural demonstrates at the very least that I'm not uttering some radical atheist hypothesis. Far from it. Suffice to say, I believe it's blindingly obvious that the natural can thwart the supernatural, so long as the supernatural claim trespasses into the natural domain. Then it's possible to bring to bear all of the tools of science and empiricism on the respective supernatural claim. Speaking of which, the God of Christianity and of classical theism more generally routinely trespasses into the scientific domain. Consider the following. Claims of God creating the universe are nothing if not claims about cosmology and astronomy. Claims of God creating life are nothing if not claims about biology, etc. Given these trespasses, is it not clear that the natural could have something to say about the likelihood of theistic claims? For example, should we discover a non-agential first mover in our cosmological investigations, wouldn't God's role in creation be nullified? And consider the following. Should we discover a godless explanation for the origin of life, again, wouldn't God's role in the creation of life be nullified? In fact, isn't this precisely how the history of supernatural claims has played out? namely that supernatural explanations are usurped by natural discoveries. For example, where once we attributed thunder and lightning to the anger of the gods, we now have the science of meteorology. Further, where once we attributed seizures and other maladies to demon possession, we now have the science of medicine. Further still, where once we attributed crop failure to, among other things, a witch's curse, we now have a robust understanding of mycology, agriculture, and the environment, etc. So it would appear that the supernatural serves as an explanation for a perpetually receding pocket of human ignorance, a supernaturalism of the gaps, so to speak. In all of these cases, and countless more, the supernatural explanation is replaced and or debunked by a natural explanation. So by my lights, we have a strong inductive case which reveals this theist's claim to be doubtful. That is, given that countless supernatural claims have been falsified by natural discoveries, why should we take supernatural claims seriously? Better still, why should we take seriously the claim that the supernatural cannot be debunked by the natural?
How can you use the natural to disprove the supernatural? You literally can't.
After all, we have an embarrassment of evidence to the contrary. And on that note, if someone comes up with a method for demonstrating the truth of the supernatural, I'll accept it. But until then, we're stuck. That said, the inductive case I just laid out doesn't deductively disprove the existence of God or any other supernatural claim. My case is a probabilistic one, which merely lowers the probability that the supernatural exists or serves as an explanation for any extant phenomenon. And that's part of the problem with this theist's video. He doesn't specify his term usage. When he alleges that the natural can't disprove the supernatural, it's not clear what he means by disprove. Does he mean to say that the natural can't count as evidence against the supernatural? Does he mean to say that the natural could never deductively rule out the supernatural? Does he mean something else? Suffice to say, it's not clear. But let's face it, TikTok isn't exactly the best place for long-form philosophical dialogue, so let's just attribute the principle of charity here and assume that the constraints of his chosen platform are responsible for the ambiguity in term usage. But whatever the case may be, I think it's clear that the natural can, in fact, weigh in on the supernatural. And I'm evidently not alone in that observation. As for deductive proofs for God's non-existence, if that's what he's looking for, take your pick. For example, omnipotence paradoxes persuasively rule out the existence of any all-powerful being, by my lights at least. As the traditional problem goes, can God create a rock that's so heavy he can't lift it? If he can create such a rock, then the resulting rock would be too heavy for God to lift. Ergo, he's not all-powerful despite being all-powerful. This is a contradiction. If he can't create such a rock, then his inability to create it reveals the same thing. That is, he's not all-powerful despite being all-powerful. This is also a contradiction. In short, this thought experiment logically entails the impossibility of an extant omnipotent being. Now, before you break your phone's screen or smash your keyboard to bits, allow me to anticipate one potential response. I'm well aware that theists can escape the omnipotence paradox by redefining omnipotence to mean that God can only accomplish feats that are logically possible. And to be fair, this does solve the problem. But such a response creates a whole new problem. A problem which epitomizes apologetics more generally. You see, apologists often make grandiose claims about how God cannot be disproved. And sure enough, we've seen evidence of that in this very video. The problem is, whenever somebody produces an objection which successfully debunks a feature of God's character or God's existence altogether, God is simply redefined in order to thwart this attack and to prevent falsification more generally. And that's all that's happening here. When this theist alleges that one can't use the natural to disprove the supernatural, he's merely confessing that there's no challenge, deductive or otherwise, that he can't escape by redefining God. And this simply isn't good enough. This infinitely malleable God hypothesis is what led Anthony Flew to conclude that religious believers cause God to die the death of 1,000 qualifications. And I, for one, couldn't agree more with this insight.
You say, oh, I haven't seen God, therefore he doesn't exist. So what? I haven't seen the socks in your drawer. That doesn't mean they don't exist.
Sure, you haven't seen the socks in my drawer. Or at the very least, I hope you haven't. But you have seen socks more generally, haven't you? You've seen your socks. You've probably seen your loved one's socks. You've probably purchased socks and witnessed others purchasing them too. If you're like me, you've probably been gifted socks. Yeah, Merry Christmas. And even if, through some highly improbable chain of events, you've never seen socks in person, you could observe socks in movies, TV shows, and commercials. Need I go on? Clearly, this sock analogy is garbage. You don't have to see my socks in order to believe that they exist. My word is enough. And that's because claims about sock ownership are trivial and inconsequential. Accepting my claim of sock ownership doesn't come with an expensive intellectual price tag. Accepting my claim of sock ownership doesn't require that you revise your understanding of the universe and how it operates. Accepting my claim of sock ownership doesn't require that you believe anything on insufficient evidence. And the blindingly obvious truth here is that none of this can be said about your God, dear theist. It's not just the case that I've never observed a God. I've never seen convincing evidence of one either. And unlike belief in my socks, belief in your God comes with quite the intellectual price tag. Becoming a Christian entails belief in virgin births, resurrections, miracles, etc. In other words, accepting your God requires that I fundamentally reorient my understanding of the universe and how it operates. Accepting your God requires that I believe in a whole host of evidentially bankrupt propositions. To make the comparison apples to apples, the socks in this theist's analogy would have to be magical socks, which gift the wearer with the abilities of flight, mind reading, and creatio ex nihilo. Would this theist be prepared to accept the existence of my socks were they to fit that description? Would he just take my word for it? Would he be as quick to say, so what, I haven't seen the magical socks in your drawer? That doesn't mean they don't exist. Of course he wouldn't. There's no way that this theist is so naive that he would just take my word for it that I own magical socks. And trotting out some garbage stock line about how not seeing something doesn't disprove it probably isn't going to change his mind about the existence of my magical socks either. Duh.
You say, oh, I haven't seen God, therefore he doesn't exist. So what? I haven't seen the socks in your drawer. That doesn't mean they don't exist.
The point is, I'm more than justified in rejecting the existence of your God. You can't just compare your God to my socks and conclude that atheism is foolhardy. But theists like this one assume that atheists are being inconsistent in their epistemology when they accept trivial claims on little evidence and fail to do just that regarding sensational claims such as those about gods. But isn't the difference obvious? While trivial evidence is enough to meet the evidential bar vis-a-vis mundane everyday claims such as those concerning sock ownership, the truth is, the evidential bar is considerably higher when it comes to extraordinary claims, like those that religion tends to pervade in. And the frustrating thing is this: it's the theists like the guy in this video who are actually the inconsistent ones. If I said to him, hey bro, you can't rule out the existence of Waheguru of Sikhism using your inductive experience. If I then followed up by telling him, I mean, you haven't seen my socks either, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. I think you see where I'm going here, dear listener. Suffice to say, this theist wouldn't listen to me for 2 seconds if I were to argue in that manner. Shockingly, such reasoning wouldn't raise his confidence in the existence of Waheguru. But if he were being consistent in his reasoning, shouldn't such an argument increase his confidence in the existence of the God of Sikhism? I mean, if he wants atheists to take his God seriously on the grounds that never having seen such an entity doesn't disprove it.
You say, oh, I haven't seen God, therefore he doesn't exist. So what? I haven't seen the socks in your drawer. That doesn't mean they don't exist.
Then isn't he duty-bound to believe in competing gods who are equally unseen? I dare say that to consistently reason in this manner would dictate a kind of polytheism, where this theist would be duty-bound to accept the existence of all potential God hypotheses. This is because the exact same move can be made with any God. So you see, this kind of reasoning leads to a kind of doxastic explosion, where acceptance of all God claims is entailed. That said, and to throw a dog a bone, I do understand where this theist is coming from. It's fair to say that not having seen something doesn't disprove it. For to suggest otherwise is to commit a textbook black swan fallacy. A fallacy so named because if you've only seen white swans, it doesn't follow that therefore all swans are white. There could be a black swan. And this theist goes on to say as much himself.
You say, oh, well, there's a lack of evidence. That's why I'm an atheist. So what? That's a logical fallacy. Lack of evidence is not evidence against something.
Sure, lack of evidence doesn't necessarily demonstrate that something doesn't exist. But as always, the devil is in the details. Lack of evidence definitely counts as evidence against something if the hypothesis entails the presence of evidence in a particular time and place, yet none is found. For example, the claim planet Saturn is in my closet is debunked by the lack of evidence for Saturn in my closet. Further, the claim Scarlett Johansson lives in my house is debunked by the lack of evidence for Scarlett Johansson living in my house, etc. In short, lack of evidence certainly counts as disconfirmation depending on the claim. And here's the thing. The claims of Christianity entail certain evidences that one should expect to find, but we don't. Case in point, at the time of the resurrection, it is alleged that all of the graves opened and their occupants wandered the streets once again. Yet, we have no extra-biblical accounts of this astonishing phenomenon. No eyewitness testimony, no letters of jubilation from loved ones united with their previously perished relatives, no shock horror at the sight of the dead rising, etc. Isn't this absence of evidence quite telling? Doesn't the absence of evidence lower one's confidence in the truth of the narrative at the very least? And that's just one example. There are countless others. Consider the fact that there's no evidence at all that there was ever a Jewish enslavement in Egypt.
Is there actually any evidence for the Exodus?
Well, no, there's no archaeological evidence.
Well, what kind of archaeological evidence is going to be left behind? This partial slave population that exits the country. There really shouldn't be much. We really shouldn't expect to find much of anything, and it really shouldn't be surprising, actually, if we found nothing.
A 600,000 person army, male army, not counting the old men and the women and the children. You're talking 2.5, 3 million people who go out, and there's nothing left. No pottery, no arms, no silver, no nothing that's discovered. That at least should make you wonder, wow, why would that be? When I was an evangelical, we learned that there were chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea. And so that proved, right, that's just made up. So they've got to wander around the wilderness for 40 years so that all those people can die off. But most of the time, 38 years, they stay in this place called Kadesh Barnea. So you have these 2 million people staying at Kadesh Barnea, no archaeological record of them being there. Like there are no swords or anything. They must have had swords if they're going to conquer the promised land.
Consider the fact that there's no evidence of a global flood.
The fossils in the Grand Canyon are found in layers. There is not a single place in the Grand Canyon where the fossils of one type of animal cross over into the fossils of another. In other words, when there was a big flood on the earth, you would expect drowning animals to swim up to a higher level. Not any one of them did. Not a single one. If you could find evidence of that, my friends, you could change the world. One of the extraordinary claims associated with Mr. Ham's worldview is that this giant boat, very large wooden ship, went aground safely on a mountain in the Middle East, what we now call the Middle East. And so places like Australia are populated then by animals who somehow managed to get from the Middle East all the way to Australia in the last 4,000 years. Now that to me is an extraordinary claim. We would expect then, somewhere between the Middle East and Australia, we would expect to find evidence of kangaroos. We would expect to find some fossils, some bones. In the last 4,000 years, somebody would have been hopping along there and died along the way, and we'd find them. And furthermore, There's a claim that there was a land bridge that allowed these animals to get from Asia all the way to the continent of Australia, and that land bridge has disappeared in the last 4,000 years. No navigator, no diver, no U.S. Navy submarine, no one's ever detected any evidence of this, let alone any fossils of kangaroos. So your expectation is not met. It doesn't seem to hold up.
The point is, if Christianity says something which entails the discovery of evidence on our planet, and we don't find that evidence on our planet, the reality is one's confidence in Christianity should go down. You don't just get to say, well, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. That is garbage. Some claims entail the discovery of evidence in our environment, and if we don't find that evidence in our environment, then we have good reason to doubt the veracity of the claim. And what of God, the allegedly all-loving and all-powerful entity who wants to protect us? A being who parted the Red Sea to save the Jews from Pharaoh, and Jesus, a man who walked on water and raised people from the dead. I could go on, but it seems that miracles were more frequent in biblical times. Doesn't the lack of miracles in our time shed some light on these claims? Why is it that just as soon as everyone was equipped with a smartphone camera, that God's willingness to perform miracles went out the window? Could it be that God doesn't like being filmed and prefers instead only to be written about? Could it be that we don't deserve God's miraculous interventions anymore? Theists will undoubtedly insert their favourite just so story here, but my point is this. God's hiddenness does in fact lower the probability of his existence, and ad hoc defences are hardly persuasive, nor are they theoretically virtuous. I don't want to hear about how God hides himself so we can come to believe in him freely, because that's a just so story invented to explain away the lack of evidence for God. Not to mention that such a claim ties you to the uncomfortable notion that God committed a moral wrong against all those in the Bible to whom he revealed himself unambiguously. Think about it. If your explanation for God's hiddenness is to suggest that God did not want to commit an injustice against us by robbing us of the ability to come to believe in him freely, then, by logical entailment, you are suggesting that God committed an immoral act against all those in the Bible to whom he revealed himself unambiguously. After all, those people were robbed of the ability to come to believe in him freely. So you can't have it both ways. Either God's hiddenness is a moral good, in which case he committed a moral infraction against all those to whom he revealed himself unambiguously, or God's hiddenness is not a moral good, in which case, what's the deal? Why can't God just reveal himself to us? The point is, if a Damascus Road experience was good enough for Paul, then why not for us? And furthermore, I don't want to hear about how God doesn't intervene because he wants us to solve our own problems on this planet, because that's equally a just so story invented to explain away the lack of evidence for God and God's alleged unwillingness to intervene to save us when the chips are down. Not to mention that God intervenes countless times throughout the Bible, and I don't hear Christians complaining about how said interventions robbed those individuals of the ability to solve those problems themselves. How dare God interfere with Pharaoh's free will by parting the Red Sea and drowning them? Said no Christian ever. And this is because Christians like to have it all their own way. When God is hidden, there's good reasons for God to be hidden. But when God appears, there's good reasons for God to appear. When God intervenes in order to save us, it's a miracle and God is good. Praise be to Jesus. But when God doesn't intervene and we die in misery and suffering, God is just mysterious and he has his reasons. This is having it all your own way. Christianity is a case study in how to erect an unfalsifiable proposition. The truth is, if there's loads of evidence, praise be to God, God exists. If there's no evidence, praise be to God, God exists. And that's precisely what we're seeing in this video.
Lack of evidence is not evidence against something.
Absence of evidence doesn't necessarily prove God's non-existence, but it should lower one's confidence in the claim that God exists. But I get it. One has to be aware of the black swan fallacy. It's an important fallacy to understand, as it guards against inflated inductive confidence. Now don't get me wrong, induction is pivotal, but it fails to offer certainty by definition. That said, I think people have made too much of this fallacy, so much so that it serves as a tool for smuggling bull. Let's call this kind of argumentation the black swan fallacy, which is, by my lights, the attempt to justify spurious and evidentially bankrupt claims with appeals to the black swan fallacy. You just heard it in this video. You mean there's no evidence for God? Well, that doesn't mean he doesn't exist. But as I've already pointed out, one can make this move with other gods, including all of the other gods that this theist rejects. You haven't seen Brahman. Well, that doesn't prove Brahman doesn't exist. True, but here's the thing. I don't care about whether or not your God has been disproven. All I care about is whether or not your God has been proven. And by proven, I don't mean demonstrated with certainty. I just want evidence which renders your God likely. And unfortunately, no such evidence has been presented. Nor have I found any despite years of research. But here's hoping, eh? Again, I don't care about whether or not your God has or can be disproven. Why? Because such challenges constitute a reversal of the burden of proof. Isn't it obvious? This theist frames his video by challenging atheists with the following question. How can you use the natural to disprove the supernatural?
How can you use the natural to disprove the supernatural? You literally can't.
Please notice that this framing puts atheists in the hot seat. This theist's expectation is that atheists must disprove God, and until then, he's going to continue believing. But this is fallacious in the extreme. As well as constituting a reversal of the burden of proof, what we're hearing is a textbook argument from ignorance fallacy, the mistake of assuming that one's position is true because it has not yet been proven false. But here's the thing, dear theist. Nobody has to disprove your God. You either have good evidence for your God or you don't, and it would seem that the latter is the case, in which case you have no good justification for believing in your God, irrespective of my attempt or the attempt of any other atheist to disprove your God. And isn't it just hilarious that this theist opens his video by alleging that he's going to, quote-unquote, destroy atheism?
I'll be completely destroying atheism in this video.
And meanwhile, the best he has to offer is an invitation for atheists to disprove his position. Are you kidding me? This is absurd. This is outrageous. Talk about clickbait. This guy is a liar. This is absolutely dishonest. Click into my video and you can watch me destroy atheism. Click. Hey, atheists, try and disprove my God, why don't you? Talk about false advertisement, eh? By way of analogy, this would be like me creating a video wherein I allege that I'm going to destroy theism, but as soon as you click in, you discover little more than me inviting theists to prove the existence of their God. Hardly a destruction, is it? Give me a break.
Christopher Hitchens' main points right here. The moral flaws in the universe, like pain, evil, and suffering, and also that the universe isn't going to last forever. It's going to experience a heat death, that it's flawed. So what? Just because something's flawed doesn't mean it's not designed. Think about cars that break down or phones that have bugs. They're designed.
Oh, brother. Cars and phones have human designers, so of course they have bugs and breakdowns. But your God is often alleged to be all-powerful and all-knowing. Your God is often alleged to be perfect. I don't know about you, but I'd be pretty pissed off if I purchased my Toyota Corolla from your God and the alternator failed. I mean, what gives? The perfect creator of the universe? An all-knowing and all-powerful being, and the alternator fails? You don't see an inconsistency there, dear theist? That is what we're drawing your attention to. So your comparisons with human designs, human creations and inventions is bogus. You are comparing apples and oranges, you moron. The question is this: what predictions does the hypothesis generate? The human designer hypothesis generates predictions of bugs and breakdowns because humans are imperfect. We make mistakes.
Name a yellow fruit.
Orange.
The God hypothesis generates the opposite predictions, lest you want to radically redefine your God. A drunk God would explain the data. An idiotic God would do the trick. Perhaps even a well-meaning but nevertheless incompetent God would work. Or worst of all, an evil God would suffice. And looking at the Bible, I can't nonchalantly rule out that final option. A God who floods the earth, anyone? Thereby drowning every last human, including the babies? A God who condones slavery and recommends the death penalty for homosexuality? We might be in the ballpark here, folks. But whatever the case may be, the world we inhabit is not the world that one would predict were they asked to hypothesize about the kind of world a morally perfect and all-powerful being would create. And yes, I'm aware that some Christians will attempt to reconcile all of this with recourse to Adam and Eve. But truthfully, I've had enough bullshit for one day.